God of War was finally released for PC, and now I finally got a chance to play one of these games. I know this game is very different from the previous titles, as it is a big change in mood, combat, and storytelling. Being that I never really had the chance to play the previous games, I'm only reviewing this as its own standalone title. A good portion of my thoughts are already available on my Twitch channel. I just recently finished the story missions, and a playlist is available there in case you want to watch me play the entire game. Along with that is a highlight clip of my final thoughts, which I will be using throughout this video. So you can consider this to be my complete final thoughts of the game. I'll start with a non-spoiler overview, and then we'll get into the details afterwards. There should not be any real spoilers in this video overall. The story itself takes place in ancient Norway and explores Norse mythology. Kratos, who is running away from his past, is no longer the war machine he once was, and has settled down. The game begins with him preparing the cremation of his wife who had recently passed, with the help of his kid, Atreus. From there, their journey is to go to the highest peak in all the realms, and spread the ashes to the wind. A rather simple plot that ends up taking a lot of detours and roadblocks. If there is one thing I can say about the storytelling, is that it very much feels like a story that would be told in a video game. Never mind the cinematic parts, the dialogue, the character chemistry, the drama, etc. But if you look into how they tell the story, yeah, it would be a very frustrating movie to watch. With that said, the story overall is good. Unlike what you would have with a film where you have to keep it focused, the game does a good job of letting you explore and giving you reasons to go off the beaten path. However, it does have one common element of certain things being locked away, or simply areas where the enemies are just too powerful at the moment, and so you will have to backtrack to almost every location to fully 100% the game. In regards to its size and scale, the game feels bigger than what it actually is, which is a great thing. To be more clear, the game is huge, and there are areas you probably wouldn't even step foot into if you were only doing the story missions. There is a lot of side content you can do at any time. The locations are very large and great to look at, but the pathing is far more linear than you might think. There is no Assassin's Creed Go Anywhere approach here. While it does not have that, which makes pathing more obvious, the game also struggles with properly telling you where you are on the map. But we'll get to that later. God of War 2019 is a big shift from the previous games in almost every way, so for those who are fans of those games may not find the experience they wanted from this version. While the previous games were directed by David Jaffe, who also created Twisted Metal, this game is directed by Cory Barlog, which just sounds like a boss name by the way. Barlog really wanted to shift the direction of the franchise, and well, he succeeded. Since I don't have any connection to the previous games, I do like the direction this game and story is heading. You also don't need to play the previous games to understand the plot here. In some ways, I think it may even be better if you didn't know. This kind of flips the perspective around, so you relate a little more with Atreus than you would with Kratos himself. The main characters are all unique and have some backstory to them. Each one has personality, they're all well written, and they're all just fun to watch. With this being a new location and all, there is a lot of lore though. If you include the optional shrines you can observe, this game is constantly giving you backstory to the world you're in. Along with this, the game is a big setup for what's to come next. So if you do keep tabs and pay attention to that, a lot of the info here should carry over to the next game, Ragnarok. This may sound obvious, but if things are to go exactly the way they're mentioned here, there's a few big moments that should happen in Ragnarok that you'll get a glance at here. The primary antagonist is the god Baldur. Although he is supposed to be the strongest character in the game, his fights were never overwhelming for me. They were great, and at some points hilarious, and I did die to them. But the difficulty in this game doesn't really come from one-on-one fights, with great exception to the Valkyrie fights. We don't talk about the Valkyries here. Comparing the fights you have with Baldur, it isn't as difficult as some of the previous battles you will have with other bosses. Some story missions or even side missions may actually be tougher than his fight. As a character, he is a lot of fun, but as a boss you have to fight, he is very one-dimensional. He does have some gimmicks that are special and unique only to him, so he is a unique boss in that regard. It's not that he doesn't have a gimmick or that he's not different, it's that he's not as difficult. The main story missions of the game are at one difficulty, while some side missions are at another. So the game does encourage you to go through the story, without really feeling like you have to grind or unlock a new set of armor to have a chance at completing the story. Along with this, the game does take place in multiple realms, with the primary area being Midgard. It also seems to be the most content-rich area in the game. Overall, the game is put together really well, so with this section done, let's move on to the combat. Some part of it is the combat. The combat feels good, it feels rewarding when you have the right things, the right kind of combos. But it does feel like there were some ideas that are there more as a gimmick, but not really something that seems to be as useful as it could have been, which is fine. The combat is very rewarding, but difficult to master for me. You cannot act like a wrecking ball most times, and you'll get stopped rather quickly. I was playing this game on the harder difficulty called Give Me a Challenge, where at some points you will die with just 3 hits. There are combos and ways to juggle the lightweight enemies, but there's also a lot of parrying and dodging you will have to do. The game has a rhythm to it with the combat, and you'll just have to figure that out. Your starting weapon is an axe, which relies a lot on hard-hitting attacks, with not so many ways to deal AoE damage. The problem I have with the game and using the axe is that the game constantly puts you on 1-on-3 or more situations. So for a good part of this game, you're kind of stuck trying to micromanage the fights to be as close to 1-on-1 as you possibly can. With the help of Atreus and his trusty bow, he can help disrupt attacks from enemies and get them off your back. He also has a special move of his own that you can trigger and change throughout the game. Eventually, you do get your classic Blades of Chaos, which are the polar opposite. They are great for crowd control, and at the very least, made me feel like I had more options to get in and out of fights. For the most part, the areas you do end up fighting in are large enough to move about, but there are some areas that are just too small or closed off. This did make the game more frustrating and difficult, but not impossible. Most likely, these areas are not that big a deal if you are on the regular difficulty. There are also status effects like poison or fire, and equipment you can use to reduce those effects. Moving on, let's talk about the armor and weapon system. Loadout, if you want to call it that. It's fine, but in one way it's too simple, in another way it's not complex enough. I know it's basically the same thing, but it's simple in a way that I would like to see it, but there's a lot of missing information. And like one of the best ways is this. If I were to compare 2 pieces of armor, it does not pretend to include the same runes or the enchantments on that piece of armor. Regardless of what I look at, I would have to do quick math to determine what exactly I'm giving up, because this is just a general picture and it doesn't actually tell me straightforward, yes, this is an upgrade in every single facet when you include your enchantments. Otherwise, you kind of have to do a little bit of math and pick and choose and whatever. It's not as straightforward as it should be with the comparison. Like, this whole thing could have been shrunken down to not take up as much of the screen as what it does, and still provide the same exact information and include more on top of that. So that's just my 2 cents on like the armor loadout. The weapons is more or less the same thing. Fortunately, there's only like 3 weapons in the game that you can really do anything with. Like, all the shields just do the same exact thing, so you know, it's just a matter of what kind of look you're going for, which I like. You know, it's nice to have something that you can personalize without having to give something away. Your weapons will have 2 slots to use for special attacks. They can be ranged AoE attacks or a hard-hitting attack to target 1 or 2 enemies. Although these are going to be your strongest attacks in the game, they can still be blocked or ignored by the enemy, and you can wind up dying while performing your attack. So again, timing is everything to the combat in this game. It is a gripe for me that the game doesn't really give you a chance to have your combo or a special attack be blocked or interrupted, allowing you to dodge. But I'm not great at melee in most games, so I've just never learned to manually cancel whenever moves I'm in, and dodge properly, whenever I'm actually able to cancel the move I'm using. With the armor and filtering systems, it is a very linear and basic system. It gets the job done, but it wasn't easy for me to know what I was looking at when I first started. Even now, I struggle with figuring out what armor I should use or which armor I should level up. With each upgrade taking precious resources, I'm a bit shy to use them to upgrade an armor I may end up swapping out. Finding a meta build or a build to work a certain way is something I feel should be obvious in the game itself. Right now, although the menu system is basic, I feel like I would need to look up a guide to find out which set I should focus using. Lastly, I'm going to give my thoughts on the world map. This map does not work. Like this map is just shy of being embarrassing for a large AAA game. Just shy of being embarrassing. Like, it looks great, but all it does is that it tells me that there are things to do, but it doesn't mark like the things that I have to do. And it's not that I want it to tell me where everything is at necessarily. it's a little difficult to like figure out where the heck I'm supposed to go to get from one thing to the next. And we saw earlier in the game there was like some kind of little area that I wanted to get to. I think it was here, but I thought I could get from there from here, but I cannot. I had to actually go around in the boat and land here. It's not necessarily a big deal because of how straightforward the level map design is, but in regards to all of this, like how it's all laid out, it just looks way too basic, and it doesn't really give me what I would get in other games where it's like, oh, you want to go to this objective? Okay, well then here's the actual route that you would go to that objective. That they don't show that on the map. It's more of like, this is the general area of where this thing is. Find it. And then you have to use the compass to find it. I think it's a little clunky in that regards. I don't really have much else to say about it. I never really used the map other than to mark objectives, and follow the compass afterwards. I feel the system is a bit archaic, and with the pathing being as linear as it is, I'm not sure why they didn't bother to show the actual routes on the map. Artistically speaking, the map overview looks nice and detailed, however it is practically useless as an actual map. If I had to give the game a score, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. There was a lot of effort put into the story, the lore, the characters, the music, and the boss fights. If you just want to play the game for the story, it will do just fine. However, I'm not a fan of the scripted pathing and the inability to explore and move about as I please. There are a lot of areas to explore, and a lot of places you'll never really go to on the story alone. It's the traversing of each area being very limited that I don't like. The map not being all that great is something that really bugs me. As it is an open world game, the one thing I would really need is a map to give me more detailed directions. Instead, I have to follow the compass on the top of the screen and hope I end up in the right place. It doesn't really make clear which areas within a sector are completed and where the other objectives are. There is a case to be made that it's all for sake of exploring, but I just kind of lose interest and pull up a guide anyways. In Jedi Fallen Order, the game was a lot more specific with where your unlocks were, and with that game having more movement options, it wasn't that hard to find every secret. I feel God of War would have benefited greatly if there was a button or some sort to tell you which areas within a sector are 100% clear. There is some occasional dialogue where Kratos will say something like, "We're done here," but it feels more like an afterthought, and if you missed out on that dialogue, you could end up going in circles in an area that is fully explored. Lastly, as I said, I'm not great at melee combat, so I don't really want to judge the game too harshly on that. I do wish the combat was more fluid and somewhere between where it is now and Arkham Asylum. I don't want to get away with just any kind of attack or combo, but I also don't want to get punished so severely if I accidentally hit a combo or a special attack. I do want to stress to take my criticism on the combat as lightly as you can, because it is just not in my wheelhouse. If you have this game mastered, that's great, but I have to grade it the way the game feels to me. With all that said, my favorite part of the game is Mimir. He is the comic relief this game needed, and it's just fun to hear him. In any case, those are my final thoughts about this game. Let me know what you guys think about it. What you liked or didn't like. And for those of you who did play the previous God of War games, how did this one feel to you? I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are on this. So until then, I am Mr. Rain, and I will see you next time.